There is a quiet war being waged inside almost every person alive today. It is not fought with weapons. It is not announced in headlines. It is waged in the half-second pause before you say something honest, in the twinge of anxiety after you post something on the internet, in the rehearsed apologies you offer before voicing an opinion you have every right to hold. It is the war between who you are and who you believe other people need you to be. And most of us, if we are being truthful, are losing that war every single day. We live inside a civilization that has built its entire social architecture on the currency of approval. From the moment a child is old enough to register a facial expression, she is taught, not in words, but in the subtle grammar of reward and withdrawal, that certain versions of herself are welcome and certain versions are not. The child who is quiet at the dinner table is called well-behaved. The child who asks inconvenient questions is shushed. The teenager who conforms to the group gets belonging. The teenager who dissents gets exclusion. And by the time that child becomes an adult, the lesson is so deeply embedded, it no longer feels like a lesson at all. It feels like reality. It feels like, this is simply who I am, but it is not who you are. It is who you learn to perform. I want to spend the next 20 minutes talking about something that sounds simple, but is, in practice, one of the hardest things a human being can do. I want to talk about the courage it takes to be disliked, not to seek out conflict, not to be contrarian for sport, not to perform independence as another way of winning approval from a different audience. I mean something much quieter and much more demanding than that. I mean the willingness to live in alignment with your own values and your own truth even when, especially when, the people around you would prefer you did otherwise. Alfred Adler, the Austrian psychiatrist who has been called the forgotten giant of psychology, built much of his life's work around a concept he called the courage to be disliked. Adler believed, at a time when Freud dominated the conversation, that the source of most human suffering is not trauma buried in the unconscious, not the unresolved tension between desire and repression. He believed the source of most human suffering is the desperate, consuming need for recognition, the need to be approved of, the need to be seen as good, capable, lovable, worthy, in the eyes of other people. He called this the approval trap, and he argued that almost every neurosis, almost every chronic unhappiness, almost every failure to live a full life could be traced back to it in some form. Think about what this means for you personally. Think about the last decision you made that was shaped, even partly, by what someone else might think. Think about the ambition you have never named out loud because it would sound strange, or arrogant, or impractical to the people in your life. Think about the relationship you stayed in longer than you should have because leaving would require explanations, and the explanations would invite judgment. Think about the work you do not share, because it is not yet polished enough for the critics you imagine watching. Think about how much of your life, your actual, irreplaceable, non-refundable life, is being spent in the management of other people's perceptions of you. Adler's insight was radical then, and it remains radical now because it runs directly against everything our culture teaches us. Our culture teaches us that caring about what people think is not just normal, it is virtuous. We dress it up in the language of humility, of social awareness, of emotional intelligence. We say things like, only an arrogant person ignores feedback, only a narcissist doesn't care about others. And there is a grain of truth in this, which is what makes it such an effective trap. Yes, genuine accountability matters. Yes, listening to others matters. But there is a vast and crucial difference between being responsive to honest feedback from people whose judgment you trust and sculpting your entire identity around the approval of an imagined audience that doesn't even fully exist. Because here is the thing that nobody tells you about the approval-seeking life. The audience you are performing for is mostly fictional. The harsh critics you imagine are, for the most part, not watching you. They are busy managing their own anxiety about their own audiences. The people whose opinions haunt your decisions at 2 a.m. are, in most cases, people who will have forgotten the interaction by the following Tuesday. Social psychology calls this the spotlight effect, the consistent human tendency to overestimate how much attention other people are actually paying to us. We walk through life feeling as though we are on a stage, brightly lit, every stumble noted and catalogued. In reality, we are all walking through a crowd of people equally convinced that they are the one being watched. So we are paying an enormous price, in freedom, in authenticity, in creative risk, in honest relationship, to manage the opinions of people who are too absorbed in their own performance to notice ours. That is the deal. That is what the approval-seeking life actually costs. Now, understanding this intellectually is one thing. Doing something about it is another thing entirely, and I do not want to pretend otherwise. The pull toward approval is not a weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is a biological imperative dressed in a cultural suit. Human beings evolved in small groups where social exclusion was not just painful, it was lethal. To be cast out of the tribe was to die. The part of your brain that sounds the alarm when you sense disapproval, that floods your body with cortisol and shame when you are rejected, that part of your brain saved your ancestors' lives. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is not the mechanism. The problem is that the mechanism cannot distinguish between the life-threatening disapproval of a prehistoric elder and the mild, passing, mostly harmless displeasure of a colleague who doesn't like your idea in a meeting. Your nervous system treats both as emergencies. Your nervous system says, be careful, adjust, soften the edges, make them like you again. And unless you have cultivated a deliberate practice of sitting with that discomfort and choosing differently, the nervous system wins almost every time. This is why the courage to be disliked is, in fact, a courage. It is not a passive absence of concern. It is an active, daily, sometimes moment-by-moment practice of choosing your own truth over the comfort of others' approval. It requires what the philosopher Brené Brown calls the willingness to be seen, really seen, not the curated, acceptable, approval-optimized version of you, but the actual you with the unpopular opinions and the unfinished ideas and the life choices that other people might not understand. But let me be more specific about what this looks like in practice, because I think generalities are the enemy of transformation. Let me talk about the specific arenas where this courage is most urgently needed. The first arena is the arena of honest speech. I am not talking about being blunt to the point of cruelty. I am not talking about the person at the party who delivers unsolicited hard truths and then congratulates themselves on their authenticity. I am talking about the willingness to say what you actually believe when you are asked, to disagree when you genuinely disagree, to express a preference that might not be welcomed, to give feedback that is useful rather than feedback that is merely comfortable. In a world where most social conversation is a sophisticated form of mutual performance management, genuine honesty is a radical act. It is also, paradoxically, the foundation of the deepest connections people form with each other. Nobody forms a profound bond with a person who tells them only what they want to hear. We bond with people who are willing to be real with us, even when being real is uncomfortable. The courage to be disliked in this arena is actually the courage to be genuinely close. The second arena is the arena of creative and professional risk. Every person with something original to contribute, a new idea, a different approach, an unconventional vision, faces the moment of decision. Do I put this out, or do I protect myself from the possibility of rejection? The approval-seeking mind says, not yet. Polish it more. Wait until it is inarguable. Wait until the critics have no ammunition. And the work waits and waits and waits, and the years pass. The work that changes things is almost never the work that was guaranteed to be liked. It is the work that its creator was willing to release into the world, despite not knowing how it would be received. The courage to be disliked in this arena is the courage to make your contribution rather than curate your reputation. The third arena is the arena of life design. The big choices, how you earn your living, who you choose to love, where you choose to live, what you choose to value, what you choose to spend your finite hours on. These are supposed to be your choices. But for enormous numbers of people, these choices are made primarily through the lens of, what will this look like? What will my family think? What will my peers think? What does this say about who I am in the eyes of the people whose approval I depend on? And so people live for decades in careers that do not fit them, in relationships that have become performances, in cities and communities that reflect their social obligations rather than their genuine desires. They live, in other words, someone else's life. Adler called this living in accordance with other people's life tasks rather than your own. And he was clear. It is the most reliable route to misery available to a human being. Now, here is what I want to say about the fear underneath all of this, because I think we do not talk about it honestly enough. The fear is not really about what people will think. At the deepest level, the fear is about what it will mean about you if people disapprove. The fear is that their disapproval will confirm something you already, privately, suspect about yourself. That you are not enough. That you are not as capable as you appear. That you do not deserve the things you want. That your instincts cannot be trusted. That you are, at some fundamental level, the thing your inner critic says you are. Other people's approval is not really about other people. It is a way of quieting that inner critic. It is borrowed confidence. And the problem with borrowed confidence is that it is not yours. You have to keep borrowing it every day because you never actually built the real thing. The real thing, genuine self-respect, genuine self-trust, genuine security, is built in only one way. It is built by making choices that align with your values, even when those choices are not applauded. It is built by saying the honest thing and surviving the discomfort of not being universally liked for it. It is built by making the work and releasing it and sitting with the uncertainty of how it will land. Every time you choose your own judgment over the approval of the room, you are making a small deposit into the account of your own self-respect. And every time you shrink yourself to avoid disapproval, you are withdrawing from it. Over years and decades, the compound interest on those deposits and withdrawals determines the shape of your inner life. Whether you feel solid or hollow, grounded or anxious, free or trapped. I want to acknowledge that none of this is equally available to everyone, and I think it would be dishonest to speak about the courage to be disliked without naming the unequal distribution of risk that comes with it. When a person from a marginalized group speaks honestly, the social cost is often higher. The disapproval is often sharper. The consequences are sometimes not merely social, but professional, financial, physical. The courage required is genuinely greater. This does not make the goal any less worthy. But it does mean that when we speak about the courage to be disliked, we are not speaking about a uniform, universal experience. We are speaking about a practice that every person must calibrate in relation to the specific material conditions of their life. Courage is not recklessness. It is the considered choice to be honest about what is real for you, given everything that is at stake. And I want to say something about the relationship between the courage to be disliked and love, because I think people sometimes confuse being willing to be disliked with being indifferent to others, and these are not the same thing at all. The most loving relationships, the most genuinely close, most deeply sustaining human connections are built not on approval, but on honesty. When you love someone, you do not tell them only what they want to hear. You tell them the truth because their growth and well-being matter to you more than your own comfort in the moment. When you love a child, you sometimes say no. When you love a friend, you sometimes say, "I think you are making a mistake." When you love a partner, you sometimes hold your ground when it would be easier to concede. This is not hardness. This is the expression of real care. Real care has the courage to risk disapproval because what it is caring for is something more important than the pleasant feeling of the current moment. The opposite of the courage to be disliked is not kindness. The opposite of the courage to be disliked is what psychologists call pathological agreeableness, the compulsive need to smooth every edge, to never allow a discordant note, to always be the person in the room who makes everything comfortable. And paradoxically, people who live this way are often the least truly kind, because their agenda is not the other person's well-being. It is their own relief from the discomfort of potential disapproval. The courage to be disliked is, at its heart, the courage to put the truth ahead of your own anxiety. And putting truth first is the foundation of every relationship and every institution that is actually worth anything. So how do you cultivate this? How do you begin to practice it when the wiring runs so deep and the social pressures are so constant? I want to offer 3 principles that I have found to be genuinely useful rather than merely inspiring. The first is to separate the task of living your life from the task of managing other people's feelings about your life. Adler called this the separation of tasks. Your task is to make choices that are consistent with your values, to speak honestly, to do the work you believe is yours to do. Other people's task, their emotional response to you, their approval or disapproval, their judgments, that is their task. It belongs to them. It is not yours to control, and it is not yours to be responsible for. This does not mean their feelings do not matter. It means their feelings are not the organizing principle of your decisions. You can care about someone's feelings without allowing those feelings to determine what you say and do and become. The second principle is to build what I would call an internal tribunal. Most of us, when we make decisions, are implicitly consulting a panel of external judges: parents, peers, critics, social media audiences, cultural standards. The approval-seeking life is the life of a person who has outsourced their judgment entirely to this external panel. The practice of the courage to be disliked involves, gradually, moving the deliberation inward. Before you ask what will they think, ask what do I actually believe is right here? What does my experience tell me? What does my conscience say? Not because your internal judgment is infallible, it is not, but because it is yours, and it can be developed, and it is the only instrument that is actually calibrated to your specific life. The third principle is to make peace with the impermanence of disapproval. Most of the disapproval we fear has a very short half-life. The colleague who dislikes your idea in November has usually moved on by January. The family member who was uncomfortable with your choice adapts over time in most cases. The internet comment that felt like a verdict is forgotten by its author before you have even read it. When you are in the acute phase of being disliked, it feels permanent and totalizing. It rarely is. And the thing that often breaks the spell, the thing that transforms acute disapproval into background noise, is simply continuing to live well. Continuing to do good work. Continuing to be present and honest and engaged. Time and integrity are the most effective answers to most forms of social disapproval. I want to close with something that I think cuts to the heart of why this matters beyond the personal. We are living in a historical moment of extraordinary conformity pressure. Social media has created an environment in which the feedback loop between action and social consequence has been compressed to seconds, in which enormous numbers of people are always watching, in which the incentive to perform an approved version of yourself is more powerful than it has perhaps ever been in human history. And the consequence of this is not merely individual unhappiness, though it is certainly that. The consequence is a gradual, collective narrowing of what can be thought, said, created, debated, questioned. When people are afraid to be disliked, they become afraid to be honest. When they are afraid to be honest, the quality of our shared thinking deteriorates. The decisions we make collectively, as organizations, as communities, as societies, become less intelligent, less honest, less grounded in reality. The courage to be disliked is not a luxury or a personality quirk. It is a civic necessity. A culture in which people cannot bear to be wrong or unpopular is a culture that cannot learn. It is a culture that cannot correct its mistakes. It is a culture in rigid, slow decline. So when you practice the courage to be disliked, when you say the honest thing, when you make the unconventional choice, when you stand for something that costs you some approval, you are not only doing something for yourself, you are doing something for the quality of the world that the people around you inhabit. You are keeping alive the possibility that the truth can be spoken, that ideas can be genuinely tested, that people can be trusted to deal with reality, even when reality is uncomfortable. That is the gift that honesty gives. That is the culture that the courageous build. And it begins, as all things begin, with one person in one moment deciding that their own truth is worth more than the temporary comfort of being liked. That person can be you. It can start now. Not perfectly, not all at once, but in one small, specific, concrete choice to be real rather than approved, to be present rather than performed, to be yourself rather than an algorithm trained on other people's preferences. The world does not need more people who are liked. It needs more people who are honest. It needs more people with the courage to be disliked. And it needs you to be one of them.